Welcome to Samson Schames Family and Friends. This is the continuation of our exploration of Samson Schames and his art, with a recent discussion by a panel of international experts. Annika Friedman from Germany, Dr. Rachel Dixon from the UK, and Dr. Ori Scholtes from the US. You will find the link in the chat in a bit. I'm Rachel Stern, Executive Director of the Fritz Ascher Society for Persecuted, Ostracized, and Banned Art based in New York. During today's event, we will first watch a short film created by the Leo Baeck Institute-New York, which will introduce the artist. I will then introduce William Reitzer, former Executive Director of the Leo Baeck Institute-New York, who will introduce our distinguished panel, including NATALIE Green Giles, James McCaffrey, and Charlie Scheid, and moderate the conversation. After the conversation, there will be time for Q&A, so please post your questions. Let's now watch the short introductory film about Samson Schames.
Samson Schames was born in Frankfurt and grew up in a very old Orthodox Frankfurt family whose roots are going back to the Frankfurt Judengasse. This means up to the 18th century.
Well, Schames comes from a very interesting family. First of all, he has a religious background, an Orthodox religious background. His family was part of the Israelitische Religionsgesellschaft, and you can see in his works that he's really familiar with Jewish tradition. What you can see, I think, especially in the mosaics, is that he didn't study, let's say, pure fine art in the beginning, but it was more applied arts. He was doing scenes for the theater as a stage designer as well.
Samson was forced to flee as a result of the Nazis taking over, and he barely made it out in time, he and his wife.
So I left Germany and went at first to Holland and later to England. After the war started, I have been interned for 3 months in Hayden near Liverpool. Yes, I tried to continue my paintings there, and I did take every material which I could find. For instance, I make my own colors out of black soot, which I mixed with thick condensed milk. Make one of the mildest black I ever used, a real black which stands still today, and this is really good black.
There was no paint available, there was no canvas available, none of the materials that a painter would normally use. And the insistence on creating from the detritus of the Blitz, all the pieces of glass and cement and wire, and he insisted on continuing to use even that as evidence of the continuation and the persistence of the human spirit.
Yes, I found a lot of rubble lying around, all these stones, and then we researched to make something positive out of these negative things which we had all about us.
The necessity to create from the rubble of the Blitz was what inspired him and what drove him to create these works. I think many of the themes that are in the mosaics are also themes which appear later in the paintings that he did here. Large number of self-portraits, and one sees many of the same facial expressions and the same sense of tragedy and history in those works as one sees in the mosaics.
Forest Hills back then was Main Street America. You saw kids in their sneakers, and he just looked different. He looked distinctly European, and it was his attitude too. He had a certain attitude about him. Edith would have us down, and she was kind of intrigued by us playing around. And we became very familiar with Samson's studio. And here was this place. There were these canvases all over the place, and there was paint on the floor. And and then we would get the opportunity sometimes to be there while Samson was actually working, and just to watch him create. My mother developed a relationship with Edith, his wife, and then Samson. And that's how I really became involved in owning his artwork. We have roughly 56 pieces. My mother had bought a couple paintings with me in mind, certain boat scenes. And my mother had sent paintings over to Germany. They had taken a few of the paintings that we have on the wall now, and they were part of, exhibits there.
The Jewish Museum Frankfurt did the first exhibition on Schames after his death in Germany. Since Schames is a Frankfurt artist who was forced to exile, it's been important for the museum to collect his works and make him more known, because those artists, they started to have an artistic career in Germany before the Nazis got into power, and they started to be known, like Schames. And due to their exile, there was a strong break in their artistic careers. They never managed to get as known again as they once were. So we think that morally and from the subject, it is a task for us to collect those artists and make them more known again to the German and international public today.
Schames' work is relevant today because he's really one of the forerunners of detritus art and ecological art. Trying to make something out of nothing is certainly an idea today, and I think he's a bit of a forerunner, and I think we should really try to remember who came before us,
It would mean a huge amount to Schames and to me to see them displayed, because they would speak to the human spirit and creativity and the ability to create from so little. And I think it would be most important for them to be seen and recognized both as works of art and as symbols of resistance to oppression.
I'm now honored to introduce today's moderator, William Reitzer, who spent a decade until his retirement in 2022 as the executive director of the Leo Baeck Institute-New York and Berlin, a research library and archive dedicated to preserving and promoting the history of German Jewry. Billy continues to work on projects focusing on reaching new audiences at LBI, including the creation of an exhibition on the art and life of Samson Schames, which just opened at the Center for Jewish History. After earning his PhD in environmental psychology, Billy spent much of his career working in higher education at the University of Massachusetts, Amherst, Wesleyan University, and Fairfield University. Welcome, Billy.
Thank you, Rachel, and thank you so much to you and the Fritz Ashford Society for sponsoring this event. We're so pleased about all that's going on around the life and work of Samson Schames. I think later in this discussion, or at the end around questions, we might talk about other ways to learn about Samson. But right now, what we want to do is talk more personally about him and his wife, Edith. And we have three individuals that are definitely very well qualified to do that. You'll be hearing from Charlie Scheidt, who was also in that video. Charlie's father was a childhood friend of Samson Schames, which was the beginning of Charlie's interest when Samson made it to New York. Charlie also was around, young but around, and got to know Samson and Edith in their time in New York. NATALIE Green Giles is a descendant of the Schames family, that family's roots in Frankfurt, Germany. The Schames family trace back to the 15th century in the Judengasse, so a very long part of this history. And Jim McCaffrey, who you also saw in the video, grew up in Forest Hills, Queens, where he and his young friends, as boys, spent time in Samson's studio as long as he tolerated that. Jim's mother, Catherine O'Neill McCaffrey, was close friends with both Edith and Samson. We're going to go through some talk here, and please submit your questions, and we will get to questions and answers in due time. So to begin with, I'd like to ask each of the three people to give us a little more detail. I did it briefly about you and in your family's basis of how you knew Samson and Edith. And we'll start with Charlie.
So my father and Samson attended the Raphael Hirsch School, Orthodox school in Frankfurt, and were friends back then. I don't know the extent to which they stayed in touch during their exile. Samson in the UK, my parents and my father in Paris, but they certainly reconnected when they came to the US. I have a photograph of them playing chess in Tannersville, in a bungalow colony in Tannersville. It must have been the late 1940s. So they connected quite soon after Samson and Edith came to the US. And they were regular guests in our home, and we would visit them regularly in Forest Hills. So it was quite a close friendship with Samson and Edith and our family. And we also bought works from Samson.
Great, thanks. And NATALIE, would you like to speak about your family connection?
Yes, thank you, Billy. Again, my name is NATALIE Green Giles. I am a descendant of this 500 plus year Schames family and consider myself the bridge to the future. I was barely alive when Samson left us. I was born in 1965. My mother, though, who was very much with us, has the direct memories and is the first American born in the Schames family. And I will just say my childhood was infused with Schames because my great-great-grandfather was the famed gallerist Ludwig Schames, who is Samson's uncle. And not only was he a big figure in my grandmother's life, with whom I was very close, but he literally and physically loomed large because there was a Kirchner woodcut of Ludwig Schames hanging in my grandmother's house. And we were very aware of the power of art growing up. And I will save the anecdotes, I think, and leave it there because I can dive into some stories, but I think this is not the time. Correct?
Correct. So,
Okay.
but just to date that, Samson Schames and Edith came to New York in 1948, and Samson died in 1967. Edith died in 2010, so that people gain a perspective about that. So, Jim, could you talk about how you knew Samson and Edith?
Yes, sure. My relationship with Samson really is just a kid from the neighborhood who first came upon Samson, watching him walk down the street some early morning. I had seen him a number of times and just found him, as I said before in the interview, just a different kind of individual. I was kind of captivated by him. I didn't see that type of long-haired individual looking very austere and the European type of outfits, and so I was fascinated by him long before I ever had a conversation with him or got to know him. And as it was said, uh, through a friend who lived in the same building that he did, I was introduced to his studio, and as was also said, we ended up as kids, two boys playing and running around, and that ended us up in that studio. And there would be Samson working with paintbrush and canvas, and there were crumpled canvases around and rolls of canvas and all sorts of things that you would think you would find in a studio. And through my association with my friend, my mother and his mother came together, and then my mother with Samson, and then it became just a long-term relationship, especially with Edith, because Samson passed away not that long after my mother and Edith had become friends, and that was a lifelong friendship. And my mother's passion, real passion for Samson's art, not only was she attempting, as Charlie talked about, trying to buy paintings at every opportunity. And we certainly didn't have a lot of money. So she, any chance that she could get, she would be over there and trying to purchase a painting. And for relatives, for cousins and aunts, and I have relatives over in Europe who have Samson's work because she's just so passionate about it. So that's
Jim,
it for now.
yeah. Why don't we leave it with you and then we'll go back to the others to tell a story, something. I mean, I'd love visualizing you and your friends, hanging around his studio, but something that helps capture who Samson and or Edith were as people that you knew.
Well, it's interesting. Those two self-portraits, those ink drawings, they're in my collection, and they were my mother's collection, and those were given to my mother by Edith. And there was that side of Samson, and I don't know enough about his long-term history. But I do know that my mother had described, and I would listen to the conversations that my mother and Edith would have, and there were bouts of depression and bouts of kind of darkness there in Samson, and those uh, those ink drawings kind of I got that impression even as a kid that that this man was at times troubled, and I would imagine with everything that he went through, that was in. And as Edith had pointed out, there were bouts of that, but the relationship between Edith and Samson I think Natalie, talks about their passion for each other. And uh, Edith was completely devoted to Samson and his work, and her desire. It was kind of funny. I had talked to you earlier, and Edith had no problem, you know, talking, what she felt and what she thought. So, my mother would be interested in a certain painting, and and Edith would say to her, "This painting is not for you. You're not worthy of this particular piece of art." And or they would have conversations, and my mother, she had some very strong opinions, and she was, artistic in her own right, and wonderful with certain things. So they would have all sorts of discussions, and then Edith would, you're just bourgeois American, and you can't appreciate this, that, or the other thing. So there was always that light from Edith. I always appreciated that. And a matter of fact, I was there, excuse me, I was there when she was kind of talking about the Americans so openly, how she she felt about certain Americans, and I enjoyed her so much. I mean, I never took offense from it. I just appreciated her openness and her willingness to just say what was on her mind. And so would this be the time to mention the story with my mother's retirement? So I'll just give you a little example of my mother retired from New York State Department of Commerce, International Commerce. So it was a wonderful event, and in where they held it, which was in one of the meeting rooms, was a huge industrial mural of buildings and factories and all that comes with you know, commerce and capitalism. And Edith was staring at it for a while. She was like looking over at it. She was really studying it. I was watching her because, Edith could be, you never know what Edith was going to do. So I was kind of studying her. She was studying it. And then she was done looking at it. And she just put herself on this big couch in between a number of people and said, "I am a tramp." And she had these folks kind of looking at her. Everybody had like champagne glasses, and I knew that she was like put off by that whole kind of scene, and I knew what she was talking about. And that was an example of Edith Schames. She was that type of person who spoke her mind, and I loved her dearly. And the one thing I'll just leave with was that my mother preferred to be called Catherine, if at all. And to Edith, she was always Kathy, Kathy this and Kathy that. And my mother, never objected. My mother didn't, she would always correct people when somebody tried to call her Kay or Kathy or whatever. And with Edith, she loved Edith so unconditionally, and they were great friends until Edith's passing. So I just
Thank you.
appreciate being here. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Natalie, what would you like to share?
Well, I have two humorous anecdotes, but I will start with just piggybacking because Jim queued it up. I think it's been said too many times that Samson and Edith had quite a romantic love affair, and there's much evidence, including many, many nude paintings, which are somewhere now, not in the current exhibition. And after Samson's death, my grandmother and Edith became quite close. They were actually not the same generation, but because of age differences, they were basically the same age. And I guess Edith would share very intimate details of their relationship, which my very bourgeois and somewhat conservative grandmother found shocking, but not shocking enough to not share with my then adult mother, who then shared with us. So we have a lot of knowledge of how wonderful their relationship was. I think you would call it oversharing today or TMI, but that's who Edith was. The other very silly anecdote is, I guess, timing-wise, it would have been right after Samson arrived in America with this new bride on his arm, and would show up at my grandparents' apartment. And my mother at the time was in elementary school and not carrying the Schames art gene at all. So at that time, I guess teachers did not care how much effort you put into your projects. They just wanted to see the final perfection. And in art class, my mother would have to sneak home her art projects unfinished. When Samson would come, he would actually finish the art projects for her so that she could submit them, and presumably reach some kind of achievement. But the joke is, in 1950, if you do the timing, it's about when he was getting reviewed for his Carlbach gallery exhibit in New York. So some public school teacher, third grade public school art teacher in Kew Gardens, Queens, was critiquing his art simultaneously with the New York Times.
Those are great. And just to accent that relationship, we have documentation, a quote from Schames that we use, Samson, that we used in the exhibit, that says that he wrote somewhere that Edith was a last unexpected gift from Germany as he left Germany. In other words, Germany was spitting him out, as he escaped from the Nazis, but this gift of Edith, who then followed him to London, and together they came to New York. So it really was a special relationship. Charlie, do you like to share?
Well, now that you mentioned his quirky sense of humor, his ability to see the humor in most situations. And I remember that very vividly at dinners, and just being surprised by what he might say, and the twinkle in his eye. In the exhibition also, we have a Hanukkah card that he sent my family, and what he did was he took a Miro UNICEF card, and on the cover, he then painted a candelabra using elements of the Miro UNICEF card into converting it into a Hanukkah card to my family, and it's just beautifully done. It's his sense of color, and it's just in itself, it is a work of art. So another anecdote I can share, maybe like Natalie's mother. I lack the painting gene, but I remember up in Tannersville that Samson tried to teach me something about painting, and I guess both Samson and my parents were quickly convinced that the case was hopeless. But he did try. So, and just finally, I'll mention that a visit to Samson's atelier, where he painted, was always a very exciting experience. Just to be in that environment, and much like Jim, growing up, to be in that environment, even for an afternoon, was always surprising, interesting, rewarding. It was a different world that one entered when one entered that his studio, and my recollection is that the studio was in the front towards Austin Street, and that they lived actually on the same floor the kitchen and their bedroom was in the back. So so that kind of sets the scene.
Mhm. Great. So really get an interesting feel, and I've been doing that, working with Charlie on this for a long, long time, about Samson and Edith, and this is all about the stories, but I'd like to put them in context and see how you would respond. For those who don't know, a little more of the history, we talked about when they came to New York. Samson was born in 1898 and into this Frankfurt world that we talked about, that was there for hundreds of years in Frankfurt. And everything would have been fine. I mean, he had challenges. His father died when he was young. The family had financial problems. And he built, started to build an artistic career. But when the Nazis took over in 1932, he lost his ability to present his art. It became degenerate art, and much of it was destroyed. And it was because of that he we consider that his first exile, an internal exile. Then but ultimately he had to leave, to escape to Great Britain in 1938. But there he also, in that exile, suffered challenges of being in an enemy alien camp because he was German, even though he was German Jewish. The British did not distinguish that. And then later cleaning up the detritus from the Blitz, which he used in his art as well. And then in 1948, they came to New York, and you've heard a lot about that. So I'd love for the three of you to think about and answer the question of, if you think about these three exiles and the person that you're describing, you know, the impact of the challenges, of the ups and downs, and how that might help you understand, or help us understand, Edith and Samson and their lives. I can call on you, or I guess we'll start with Charlie and move back to Natalie and then Jim about that.
Or is your question about the art?
Not yet. No, not yet about the art, about the people. So what did you see in their lives that reflects the good and the bad of how they went through three different exiles and ended up in New York?
Yeah. From my experience,
yeah,
the struggle that he had here to make a name for himself, it speaks to the difficulty that migration, forced migration, fleeing for your life, or being the outsider, being interned in the UK, coming here, knowing few people and trying to establish his reputation again. We see that. But there was also the need to continue to create, the passion for art. And I would say that's true of both Edith and Samson. Samson as a painter, Edith, who had a beautiful voice, as a singer, and she sang in synagogues and in churches. I'm sure she would have liked to have a real singing career, such as she had in Germany. And I think she had some success, but it's so difficult to start over. And I was always kind of aware of their struggle, and how difficult it was, and yet they persisted, and they survived and continued to create. It's that spark of creation that we see.
Mm-hmm. Right. So that disappointment, but also that resilience. And one of the examples I think you're referring to is that he was encouraged to submit a work one of his mosaics to Museum of Modern Art, to MoMA, and was encouraged to do so. And then we have a copy of the letter of his rejection, and also in his own diary, just how hurtful that was for him. That he really, based on that encouragement, had expected it to work out, and it did not. And maybe this also leads to also an understanding of Jim's observations about some depression at times. Natalie, do you want to add to
Yeah,
that?
I don't have, obviously I don't have firsthand information. I can only speak to sort of the Frankfurt psychology of my other family members. Nobody wanted to leave. This was truly a forced exile. And in fact, part of my family left a little bit before him. I have the lingering question of how he left his mother and sister behind. I do not have the answer to that. I only know that their reputation in Frankfurt, that whole, again, tied to the Ludwig Schames world, he was always fame adjacent, and it would have been very hard to up your roots and start over. And I think there's a lot of thwarted dreams and but a lot of optimism and resilience at the same time. My great-great-grandfather's gallery was showing Kirchner and Max Beckmann. Max Beckmann was Samson Schames' teacher. So there was no reason for Samson to believe that he couldn't be very, very successful. I really believe that he thought that it was within grasp. So with each exile, I think it's fair to say that the New York decision was probably based on partially that there was family there, but he was already in London for 9 years. The war was over. I think there was some commercial opportunity that he thought would potentially be realized in New York as well, which wasn't actually.
Great, thanks. Jim, do you want to add?
And so much was said, and Charlie made some points in regards to just his need to create. And I mean, there's so many examples of in the collection that I have of all the different kind of art that he created. One of the paintings that we have, which is the one I cherish the most, is this dilapidated wicker chair that he painted. And Charlie mentioned about being able to watch him create and how powerful that was. But a few years after we had owned this painting, I just had happened to walk around the corner, and I had looked into the backyard, and I found that dilapidated chair in the backyard, the real thing. And just to be in the presence of the actual thing that he had painted, it moved me, and I believe that through everything that he had to go through, and Edith always talked about this, to my mother. In a way, she would describe what they went through, but she also described it in a way that you couldn't really appreciate what they went through. She was saying, you have no idea what we had to go through and the struggles that we had to go through, and you just couldn't appreciate it. But we had persevered, and they were, at least, I can really speak to Edith, and Charlie, talks about him in a way that I didn't really experience him. Even though he was friendly and gentle, he wasn't, I didn't experience him as gregarious and fooling around and all those kind of things. But I know through Edith that they were, a force, and the love of art. Edith encouraged me because I got interested in music and playing music, and I sang in bands and things. But I had a strong voice, and she would always encourage me. She wanted me to get my voice trained, and she was always yapping to my mother about the fact that you encourage him to do this. So she was always. It seemed about the art, and as far as kind of what Natalie was talking about, Edith took it very personally that he wasn't appreciated in the way she thought he should be appreciated. And she was always very much, pushing that he should get the recognition that he deserved. So I would imagine that there was a lot of frustration. And but again, like Charlie said, I really believe that, I look at the collection of art and all the different kind of paintings that we possess, and I have about 20 of them on my walls, and all of the beautiful things that he would look at and needed to paint. And so I think, despite all the frustrations and disappointments, that I think just the love of art, carried him through, and Edith's love of the art, carried them through. I think that is foremost. So yeah, that's about it.
That's great. And that's a really good segue to a question I'd like to ask each of you. And we will be taking questions soon, if anyone wants to post them in the Q&A box. And if many of you watching may have seen a few weeks ago when the Fritz Escher Society sponsored 3 art historians who looked at Shams's work. And I found it extremely interesting how they looked at his art and through that tried to figure out who he was. And here today, we're talking about 3 people who know who he was, and from that perspective are looking at his art. So it ends up being the same question, just a mirror image, if you will. But to think about, your personal experience, and some of it handed down through family, and what piece or pieces of art really help you see and remember them, and help you help explain to people who he was, if you want to focus on one or more of his works, whether we're displaying them or not in the exhibition, just how the person informs the art. Should we start with Natalie?
Yeah, I'll begin and just say, just to go back again, not to belabor the Ludwig Schames connection, but the painting and the opera plots, which Annika Friedman discussed in the previous webinar, and how the perspective is the grand opera house is to the back. But for those who wouldn't know, the perspective is looking at what would have been Ludwig Schames's gallery. And this is 1930, 8 years after Schames has died. And for me, I mean, I can't psychoanalyze, but I feel like that painting is about his connection to his uncle. And this is, of course, before Nazis came in. And so this is already perhaps some kind of longing to have been recognized by his uncle. Again, I don't want to overstep, but that to me is what I feel in that painting. And then the mosaics of the stained glass mosaics, what I would call that he did in the 1950s in this country, which are just this counterbalance to everything, which for me, I saw those for the first time at the Jewish Museum in Frankfurt in 2023 when they were on display. And it was just this breathtaking moment of, after all the dark, all the agony, all the destruction, to be the one who is reclaiming these pieces, these shards of glass, and putting them together in this beautiful, holy way, with Jewish iconography and the light coming through. And I just saw that as incredibly hopeful.
That's really nice. I just want to add on to that, our knowledge, though, at the same time, his work in stained glass was not unrelated to his congregation, Abonim, who were building a synagogue with amazing stained glass that exists to this day, although it's in storage because that's being rebuilt. But he was rebuffed, and his designs for that stained glass were not used. So I don't want to take away from the warmth that you feel about those stained glass, but also contained it could also be some the other perspective. Charlie, do you want to speak to
Yes, and since you mentioned the stained glass that he had designed for the congregation, uh, that too must have been quite a letdown. Uh, Certainly his design, the design that we see uh, for those for the congregation uh, was really quite stunning, quite like the mosaics that Natalie mentioned, and which are actually in the exhibit, the current exhibit at the Leo Baeck Institute. Um, I, I'll go back to the painting of the Opera House. Um, it's a painting I know very well because my parents had that painting, and it's very and I grew up with it. And the more you look at that painting, I did not know the connection to the Ludwig Schames gallery. Um, but the focus, if is really, to the extent that there is a focus, is on a person who's bent over, who's walking uh, across the the square there, and there there are a couple of traces of other individuals, but the painters, the he did not paint the opera house. He painted the square with a bent over individual walking. Um, and I think it's also a social commentary. He was not interested in the glitz of the opera house itself and the monument um, that represented. He was interested in the environment, and the colors are muted uh, in the painting, and I think that speaks to his sense of social responsibility and being the artist, the outsider. Um, uh, as far as other artwork, um, I I suggest, or I'm particularly struck by the self-portraits. Uh, they are they they speak to a mood. They are, I find them very powerful. Uh, and you know, there's also the painting that he did after he learns of his mother's death, which is quite haunting. So I think his life story, and Jim mentioned the depression. Um, he had a lot to deal with, and he expressed it in some of those works, and I think expressed it powerfully.
Thanks for that. And we didn't get to mention that he lost his mother and sister in the Holocaust, but never received final word of how his sister perished, and learned about how his mother perished. She died in 1942, and I think he did not learn about it fully. He got documentation in 1954. So another very difficult thing. We'll move to questions if there are any soon. So again, put something in the Q&A box. But Jim, did you want to comment about seeing Samson in his art, or his story in his art?
I mean, I'll just talk about the three paintings that were in the 1989 catalog from Frankfurt that are ours, that were my mother's, and that reflections. There's the one of reflections with that beautiful brown building, and the reflections into the water, and it's kind of, it's fascinating painting, and just his joy of that beautiful scene. And then the other one is the subway. The people in the subway, they call it the subway, and just that all those people in their outfits, and they look like they're in a rush. And then there's a painting that I have in our collection it's from the studio view, into the Forest Hills Gardens, which is, important to me, because I have that kind of postcard of that view of Forest Hills. I haven't lived there for a long time. So those those paintings, and then there's the other one that was in the collection, the 1868, which was very dark, looked like a park. It looked like something, very, very dark and very dismal and troublesome, and but beautiful. And so there were so many facets, it seems, to what he was picking up on, and I'm just reminded of the fact that when I was thinking about some of the still lives, which I love also, is that in the studio on the floor, because Charlie's talked about the missing mosaics, was this huge mosaic that was sitting there that couldn't be moved. I mean, this was one giant piece of cement with all the shards and all of that, and just seeing the still life that was on his table, and it was there. So he must have been working on it for like a couple weeks, because I kept noticing that it was on the table, and I don't remember seeing the painting of those, but just I mean, just the complexity and the things that interest him. There were some very dark things. We have some oils that are very dark, some heavy canvassed oils, and they're of forests, and they're almost like a number of those paintings that I have, and they get darker. And there's ones that the same image, kind of a whirlpool with light, and then they get darker and darker. So just kind of fascinated. It seems like, his personality was all facets of his personality were in his paintings. So.
Yeah. I would just like to add that, because we didn't, you mentioned just then, Jim, the mosaics. The mosaics, and Natalie did mention or maybe it was Jim, the stained glass, Natalie, the stained glass mosaics, but the mosaics that he did in Great Britain, not only are they amazing in terms of their subjects, but they show that he would use whatever materials he had, and that's, his art is so broad, from what we have from Frankfurt to Great Britain to New York. And he needed to continue to create, and the materials that he had was the detritus from the Blitz, and out of it he created these most memorable works. So I really see that as a great example. Rachel, we'll take the lead from you. If you have some questions for them, I don't know if there's any in the question box. Where'd you like to go with this?
Yes, I do. First of all, I liked Jim's description that Samson Schames really expressed how he felt in all his artwork, because that's what a real artist does. His artwork is how he communicates with the world, and he doesn't really have a choice to do anything than that. So, and with that, I would like to ask both Jim and Charlie, who have said that you were in his studio while growing up. I would like to know, did he stop working when you came? Were you able to come in anytime you wanted, or were there times that were set for visits of children, of neighbors, or how were these experiences? Or did you see him work? What do you remember in that regard?
Charlie, would you like to go first?
Well, I think you'll have better stories, because as a kid, just walking in there. So why don't you start?
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I mean, there were plenty of experiences where, of course, it looked like what you would think an artist studio would look like, and as Charlie described, they their apartment really is what it was, and there was the kitchen to the back, and then their bedroom. So the studio was crowded with canvas and easels and all sorts of stuff, and then you had this wonderful big window of southern exposure, and yeah, we would find ourselves in there and running around, and if we got too crazy running around there. Samson would just tell Edith, he would give a signal and we were to be removed. I mean, we were just, get these guys out of here. But he also, I did very much pick up on that he was amused, by us. He was intrigued by these characters running around his house, and it never stopped him from working. And there were times when I was there with my mother, because my mother was so fascinated by Samson and so fascinated by the whole world that he lived in and Edith lived in, that she found herself there a lot, just having coffee with Edith. And I had been there, at that point with adults around, keeping my mouth shut, sitting down, and my mother and Edith would be having conversations, and Samson would be working. I mean, he would just, be working. He seemed to, I mean, he was a prolific artist. He seemed to be working quite a bit. From my time of knowing him, there was always him working, so.
Mm-hmm. And Charlie, do you have memories?
So my visits growing up were with my parents. Obviously, I didn't drive, and we lived in Manhattan. They were in Forest Hills, so I would go with my parents, and those visits there was always a lot of talking about. Of course, all the conversation was in German, and they were. There would be a lot of talk. I speak German, so that was not the problem. The problem was there were subjects that interested me peripherally, let's say. Uh, but I would be looking around, and there were always lots of works at various stages of completion, and Samson would be trying to sell my parents something, and he would be showing this and that, and I always found it absolutely fascinating, and to see the different works, and to see the personality of the painter, Samson's personality as he spoke about different works and showed them. And there would always be coffee and cake for the adults, and I guess cake and milk for me. But that was the scene, and it was a great world to enter.
Oops.
Okay, I'm sure he will be back on in a minute. I was wondering, Natalie, maybe Jim also. I've heard or I've read that in my question is really how important was Jewish culture to him, Jewish religion. I've read that Samson's family came to to Ludwig Schames, the gallerist, for holidays and so on, for religious holidays. What do you hear? Like, what did you hear from your family about that?
I really can't speak too much. I can tell you that Shamus family, which includes my great grandmother and my grandmother in New York, they were very religious. They were East End Frankfurt. If you know Frankfurt's Jewish world, it was like West Side Story. There was the East End Orthodox and the West End assimilated, and in that family was very Orthodox. But by the time New York came around, I think a lot of that was lost in my my part of the Schames family, there was branching out from the strictly Orthodox. So maybe Jim knows better.
I really can't speak to Samson and any of that, but I can speak to Edith because she was very involved in her synagogue. And I just remember Edith, like, either she absolutely loved the tenor or didn't like the tenor. So it was, and she was very involved especially, I believe later on, she had gotten involved in the singing at her synagogue, and that was extremely important to her. She was.
I do believe that was a paid gig. So that was
Yeah.
But it is a sign of, I think, how she approached, religion. They certainly were much less observant than would have been found in earlier generations of the family.
Mm-hmm.
And it would be pure speculation for me to say anything specific about them, but also when you factor in, for many, the experience of Germany and having to leave Germany, and what happened to themselves and their families, it put a real challenge to many about how they wanted to practice.
Yeah. Yeah, but he does from really in Frankfurt already, and then throughout his career, Jewish themes come up in his artwork. And Monica was asking whether any of the speakers could throw any light on Schames' evident preoccupation with the figure of Christ, because that we see in the mosaics and so on. So. Can any of you speak to that?
That is, I believe my mother I think I had asked the question, and I can't really speak to that. I know that that was discussed, and but as far as what his relationship with Jesus was, as far as his mosaics and things like that, I can't really speak to.
I mean, we also have to remember that artists like Chagall, for example, used the figure of Christ to express in a hostile environment, to express how they felt, they themselves felt persecuted. So it's not a sign really. It's just using the Christian iconography instead of making a statement about religious belonging, and so that I see very much in his artwork. And
Yeah, let me add, I think that's true. And then where there is Jewish iconography, like in the glass mosaics and in a couple other paintings that we're showing, that was definitely much more relatable. It wasn't there just for its iconography. It was there. There was a clear Jewish message.
Yeah, for sure. And two things first of all, I would, does anyone from the audience have questions? Because our time, we're going a little bit over time already. So if you have a question, please ask it. And there's Charlie also.
Charlie's back.
Charlie's back. That's wonderful. Maybe I know, Charlie, or that the Edith and Samson came to your family for Shabbat meals, and so we were just wondering about, the presence of both Jewish symbols or Jewish symbols, or themes of Jewish holidays and so on in Schames' artwork, and also at the same time the presence of Christ in his artwork. Whether you can say anything to his religious beliefs.
I cannot, can you hear me okay?
Yes, yes.
I cannot really speak to his religious beliefs. I can just say that he was both he and Edith were certainly participants in in the Friday nights, both in the in Kiddush and Birkat Hamazon after. Uh, uh, and I, I I don't see either of them as particularly traditionally religious. That was not my experience of them. And so, but that's just personal. I don't know. I never had a conversation with either of them along those lines.
Yeah. Yeah. So I wanted to say, I think Natalie spoke about the mother and the sister being left behind in Germany while Samson and Edith were able to leave the country. So I know that both times they didn't leave together. They Samson and Edith got married only in the US. Edith came to England a different way than Samson. They used their contacts, their family contacts, both of them. And also, Edith left a year earlier to the US than Samson. So they had, and it had to do with their passports, with their connections. Edith was stateless. So relatives sponsored her, while Samson and Jewish aid organization, and Samson had his German passport for some reason a year later, and came a different route. And I think it was just not in their power to take other people with them. It was Samson, I know, went before he was able to leave the country, before he had the papers to leave Germany. He went to Holland and to London to check out, how to get there and how to settle there and so on. So he kind of tried to find out how to get out of the country, and that must have not applied to his mother and his sister, and maybe also many older people did not want to leave because they simply didn't have the energy to go through this experience of exile and fleeing and exile and rebuilding their lives, which is tremendous. So yeah, I'm sure he felt very guilty, really, about not having been able to save them. But the question is, did he speak about that? And I think we should. Is there anything else any of you want to make as a last statement? And then then we'll pretty much wrap up the event. Should we?
I just say that I never knew that he had a sister or and that his mother had died. I think, like many families, there was not much talk about all that had been lost, family members and otherwise. Maybe there were conversations among the adults, but I was not part of those conversations. So, but it's clear we have that quote from from the diary, from his, well, it's not a diary, it's his recollections and the impact that that it had on him to have lost, to have heard about how his sister and his mother had died.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it was not a subject of conversation.
He also, by the way, had an older brother who had died with a motorcycle accident. That's what's being said. We don't know the circumstances. It could be all different. It could have been all different because the Nazis were in power already. But so he had that too, and apparently didn't speak about that either. So he had a lot of, I think, painful memories that he just decided not to focus on in order to be able to live a new life.
But I would add that thanks to his inability, his strong desire to continue to create art, which again has us having this conversation about him, those stories live, while there are literally millions of stories of exile that don't get that chance. So it's really quite an opportunity for all of us, the work of your organization, Rachel, and ours, to be able to tell those stories today and to feel the relevance of history as well as what people are going through today in terms of these same types of circumstances.
And I also want to mention, it sounded like the whole conversation very strongly focused on his and Edith's disappointment of his success that he didn't have. But the truth is, if you look at the list of exhibitions that he did in Germany, in London, and in the US, and then while he was living in the US, in Paris, in Jerusalem, and so on, he did exhibit his work, maybe not to the extent that he was expecting or hoping for, but he had exposure and showed his work, and his work was also reviewed and appreciated. So just kind of wanting to make sure that comes across. Natalie, do you want to say some closing words, and then we have Jim?
Just what Billy just said, I think said it all. And I'll just reiterate that if it were not for Edith, really, we would not be sitting here today, because she spent the next 40 years of her very long life, she lived to 98, making sure that his art would at some point be found. And that effort, I mean, that is love. That is love and art and support. And that's not just his art, that's his personal papers. Everything is in research archives and museums, so that generations to come can discover who he was.
Exactly. Yeah.
I just want to thank the Fritz Asher Society and Leo Baeck Institute for showcasing Samson's life and Edith's life, and it means a lot to me. And I want to thank Billy personally. You know, it's going through this interesting journey, because Samson's art has enriched my life. You know, I've had this on my walls for my entire life. So thank you.
Yeah, and thank you for sharing it with the public now. Thank you, Billy Weitzner, NATALIE Green Giles, Jim McCroffrey, and Charlie Scheid for sharing your stories, the family stories, memories, and thoughts about Samson Schames and his wife Edith. For further exploration, you can find Samson Schames in our online exhibition, Identity, Art, and Migration, which investigates the experience of 8 Jewish European artists who were forced to abandon their country of origin or remain in hiding for years in response to Nazi policies in effect from 1933 to 1945. So that's exactly what you were referring to, Billy. Every individual story is a different story. It's a story of forced immigration. People did not want to leave their home country, and they, in really the most cases, did not want to be in the country where which became their home later on. And the adjustment was really hard. The cultural adjustment, the language, and so on. And every person reacts differently. So we look at artists, Annie Albers, Friedel Zubers, Eva Hesse, Rudi Lesser, Lili René, Samson Schames, and Arthur Schick, who immigrated to the United States, and Fritz Ascher, who survived in hiding, which is being seen as inner immigration today. So very different stories, very different ages. Some people are very well known, others are not that known. So please browse that. We will send the link. And we have referred to it quite a few times now, but I just wanted to say that in New York, just this week, the exhibition Lost and Found, The Art and Life of Samson Schames, was opened at the Center for Jewish History in New York City. It is organized by the Leo Baeck Institute-New York and will be on view until December 21st of this year. So if you visit New York or live in New York or close to New York, please go and see the exhibition. And I want to conclude with a shout out. We are looking for mosaics and other lost or unknown works by the artists that might be part of private collections. So please let us know. We would be thrilled to include them into the known works of Samson Schames. Thank you so very much. Take good care and stay well, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.